is and what we're trying to do. I'd like to welcome especially Edwin Ritchkins, who's in, where are you, in Cape Town or in Johannesburg or somewhere? Where are you? Johannesburg. Is the Strategic Projects Advisor to the Director General and Minister of the Department of Public Enterprises in South Africa, and is really the man who is pulling together a lot of the renewables and green growth initiatives in South Africa, including power, the nuclear fleet procurement process, renewables, private sector participation in the port and rail industries, and other things, and has a research history as well as being in the private sector. Shruti Mehrotra on my left is formerly with the World Economic Forum and currently with the senior climate campaigner at Global Witness, where she's working on issues to do with exhaustion of natural resources and climate change and how it all fits together. But we'll be talking particularly, I think, about the role of the private sector in some of this. And Bernice Lee, who's the Research Director for Energy, Environment and Resource Governance at Chatham House, and is very well known in this field, not only for that set of topics, but also for her work on China. And so will, I think, be bringing particularly a China perspective to the discussion. Green growth, this is a finance series, but we're really talking about green growth, I think, in this session. And it is on everybody's minds. I was in the World Bank last week. They are about to publish a flagship paper, 150 pages, on what green growth is and how you get there, what are the price and non-price interventions that are needed. The UK government is about to launch a very large research programme on green growth. There's really been some fantastic work at ODI led by Karen Ellis on green growth, and we in the Climate and Development Knowledge Network are also working on this topic. And if anybody has the energy to go to my own website, they'll find I've put up 10 propositions on climate and development, which try to tackle, try to identify some of the big choices we need to make. First of all, should we be allowed to grow at all? And there are a number of influential voices counselling against growth, including Tim Jackson, whose book on prosperity without growth came out of the Sustainable Development Commission in the UK and has been very influential. Most of the people who argue against global growth say that developing countries should be allowed to grow, but I think nobody quite asks what would be the implication for developing country growth if developed countries didn't grow. Some people say it's okay to grow if we have green growth, and that's not just low carbon, but also low everything else, this list of resources that Shruti has been working on. Not clear to some people whether that's a feasible option. You know, growth has been based on cheap energy. Is growth feasible, cost effectively feasible, if energy prices go up? And what happens if renewables don't become competitive with non-renewables quickly? And then there are some very important questions about what kind of policy framework is needed, and that's partly what my 10 propositions are about. We need to have growth, first of all, and what are the conditions for growth? What can we learn from the Growth Commission, from reviews like the Africa Commission, from the work of the International Growth Centre based in LSE in Oxford, about the policy frameworks that deliver growth? And getting those right, cost of doing business, competitiveness, all those other things, provide the framework environment within which a whole set of green growth policies then have to be mobilised, including many on finance, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, but also issues to do with should you have a feed-in tariff, what's the value of subsidising the development of new technologies. And as we see in the UK, the big debate about whether we should have targets for different periods, what those targets should be, and how you operationalise the legal frameworks for low carbon development. So this is certainly a topical area, and it's certainly not an uncontroversial area because, as I've indicated, there are many really difficult issues to grapple with. If you have the energy, do go and have a look at my website. But in the meantime, we're going to start with Edwin, who really is at the front cutting edge of trying to manage this whole transformation in Africa. And then we'll go, I don't know, have you decided who's going first of you two? Bernice first, and then we'll go to Shruti. About 15 minutes each, max, and that'll give us plenty of time for discussion. Edwin, I hope we don't lose you. We're really glad to have you here. If we do lose you, we'll break and hope you come back in again. But over to you.
Thank you very, very much for the opportunity. I think the first principle in terms of South Africa's engagement with the transformation of its energy portfolio is the process of integrating its clean energy goals with industrial policy. And what that is about is ensuring that if, for example, we're going to be implementing a lot of wind capacity, that we do that in a way that develops our industrial and technological capabilities to design and manufacture wind blades. I think you find this process happening both in the north and the south. Germany's refit resulting in the development of quite a complex renewable manufacturing sector. What's interesting is in Ontario, they just did a deal with Samsung and KEPCO from Korea, where they procured 2.5 gigs of power from KEPCO in exchange for Samsung driving a process of investment in manufacturing capability in Ontario. So you've effectively got Korea industrializing Canada, which is quite an interesting process. The second context in thinking from an strategic economic point of view, in thinking about the development of low carbon energy technology, is that there's increasingly sensitive international trade concerns in the form of carbon border tariffs. And we've estimated that about 85 billion rand of South Africa's energy-intensive exports are vulnerable to these border tariffs, which would cost us 2.7 billion rand a year annually. And I think the key thing is we'd rather have the companies pay that money in South Africa to develop our low-carbon energy production capability than have them pay it in our export markets. So out of this context, we developed the South African Renewables Initiative, whose objective is to catalyze a critical mass of renewables investments to support what we call a fleet procurement, that is a consistent long-term procurement of renewable energy so as to give confidence to the manufacturers of equipment and technologies to invest in the South African economy so that we're not just continuously importing. The fundamentals of the project are that scientific and technological studies suggest that 15% of our grid should be viable to turn that into renewable capacity by about 2025. Our objective is to realize about $50 billion of investment in renewable capacity with the aim of enhancing investment in the underlying supply chain, enhancing our short to medium-term energy security, and secure energy-intensive exporters from the threat of carbon border tariffs. So you can see that it's fundamentally about integrating the renewables and clean carbon agenda with a hardcore economic strategy. And our core challenge to achieve this goal is to fund the cost differential between the full financial cost of coal and an ambitious level of renewables. So just to give you a sense of the overarching logic of the initiative, it starts with the South African government making an ambitious commitment towards the refit, as well as putting some money forward to fund the refit over and above the usual course of business. This would, we would hope, unlock international public climate finance, which would secure demand for renewables at a lower cost, which enables the development of a critical mass of renewable projects, which creates the demand platform for companies to invest in the supply chain, and the overarching result is green growth, jobs created, and additional taxes paid. So the two angles for bringing down the cost of that cost differential between the cost of renewables and the second angle is to increase the funding available for the procurement of renewables through various mechanisms that I'll go into shortly. So looking into the first angle, the key insight is that when you're dealing with renewables, they're extremely capital intensive, and approximately 45% of the cost of renewables relates to the financing cost. That is the return on equity required and paying the cost of debt. So the question is, how can we reduce the cost of financing this highly capital intensive equipment or technology? And you see that coal is very, very cheap from a capital point of view, but expensive from a fuel point of view, whereas low carbon technologies tend to be much more capital intensive, but much less. But fuel, certainly in the case of renewables, is pretty much free. So how do we lower the cost of financing? We can cut approximately 14% or 15% of the financing cost through concessionary debt. Another piece of it with political risk insurance to achieve what we hope would be about 30% of the annual funding gap being paid for through concessional funding, cheap debt, and risk insurance. Then the other angle is how we make more money available to fund the procurement of renewables rather than coal. And one of the pieces of it is the international contribution that would be straight grant funding, pay for performance climate-related grant funding. Another angle could be a green purchase obligation for those energy-intensive exporters to get a certificate saying they're buying a critical mass of green energy. They would have to buy a certain amount of renewables. And the final would be a national fiscal contribution, which is an interesting insight. From a national point of view, we would contribute to the development of renewables precisely because, but only if, it results in the development of industrial capabilities, additional jobs, etc., etc. So we'd be funding the added economic development advantages through the fiscus, while the international contribution would be funding the cut in carbon emissions. Now, how we would model the national contribution would be simply to take the net present value of future tax collections that would be created by the extra economic activities associated with the renewables investments, and that would be the national contributions, the channeling back the taxes into a contribution to procuring renewables over and above business as usual. I think in terms of how an additional factor in how we would structure these financial schemes is there tends to be three phases in the introduction of new technologies. First phase being pioneering, second phase being early independence, and third phase being fully commercial. In the pioneering phase, the institutional risks are high, the technology risks within a context where the technology has never been used is high, so the return on equity and the return on debt requirements from the developers would be high. Hence, you would need a fair amount of additional external support. However, as the technology proves itself and as institutional risks are managed and are shown to be lower, that required return on capital and debt will decrease, meaning our need for external grant and concession would decrease as the cost between renewables and coal closes, until finally we'd get to a fully commercial situation. And we find that in wind, that if we're able to remove the institutional risks through an initial procurement of, let's say, about 2.5 gigawatts that prove that institutionally the power purchase agreements are solid, the link up with the grids are solid. We know how to build these things in our country. After that 2.5 gigs, wind will pretty much be able to compete on a level playing field with coal. So a logical place for us to start the scheme is with the procurement of the critical mass of wind. What we estimate is that around 50,000 jobs will be created, of which 20,000 would be skilled, 21,000 semi-skilled, and about 9,000 unskilled from the Renewables Initiative process. Another key thing is if we take wind, we estimate around 85% of the equipment for wind should be localizable within South Africa. That's produced by South African industry over a relatively quick time. Our sense is that by the end of 2011, we'll already be at about 70%. So, just to finish off by summarizing the benefits associated with the Renewables Initiative, that we believe that sustained installation of renewables can drive a high levels of localization, which will result in 40,000 to 50,000 jobs and about $50 billion of investment. We should get enhanced energy security in the short to medium term. It should add to the competitiveness of our exports in increasingly carbon-sensitive global markets. It will contribute to the achievements of our climate commitments that we made in Copenhagen, and this will be done at relatively low domestic costs, the domestic contribution over and above the normal course of business being the taxes we would collect as a result of the additional economic activity associated with the scheme. And that's it. Thanks very much. I hope I'm in time.
That was completely riveting. Thank you. How amazing that 45% of the cost of building a windmill is the financing cost. I mean, that is one killer fact I took away from that. But lots of others as well. I just want to ask you a couple of quick clarifications, if I may, Edwin. You didn't mention any of the policy measures that we commonly hear about in some countries to encourage the use of renewables, like a feed-in tariff or protected pricing, but you talk mainly about fiscal subsidies. Have I understood that correctly?
Okay, so we're in the process of implementing a renewable feed-in tariff, but it's not going to be like the German feed-in tariff where if you provide the energy, they promise to buy it, because we simply cannot afford to buy the amount of renewables that companies are interested to supply, given the significant cost differential between the tariff and the cost of renewables, particularly while the cost of coal is so low. So we are putting in place a renewable feed-in tariff. The regulator has announced those tariffs. The Treasury is in an advanced process of finalising the power purchase agreements and of setting up a unit to procure the energy rather than have Eskom procuring it because of perceived conflict of interest between Eskom's and the independent power producers. And we're also in the process of putting in place the first steps of an independent ring-fenced systems operator to ensure that the grid will be procuring the energy produced from these generators on a systematic and consistent basis.
Very good. And just one other quick clarification.
So there's a plethora of policy processes taking place.
Right. Thank you. The other quick clarification is to ask you about the numbers of jobs. When you say 50k jobs, is that gross or net, where net would be jobs not obtained in running, in coal mining, for example?
So we haven't done a comparative study of
How many people work in the coal mines in South Africa at present?
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So coal is clearly a large source of employment.
Okay.
As are the coal power stations as well. We haven't done that comparison.
Okay.
It's a simple and straightforward issue.
Thanks. Riveting presentation. Bernice.
Thank you, Simon. Karen asked me to talk today about